the civil year, and we have the Festival of Trumpets coming up, trumpeting, Yom Teruah. It's called in Hebrew the Day of Trumpeting, or Rosh Hashanah. It's the head of the year, the new year of the civil calendar. Uh, that's coming up, of course, Sunday night, Monday. And I was just talking to the Merritts, who evidently were recently over in Israel. There was a Palestinian. By the way, my name is Mark David Kaplan. I live in Kissimmee. I've been, I'm a native of Connecticut. Went to college in New York City. I don't want to give my whole biography, but let's say I lived for a long time in Southern California. I lived for a long time in Texas as well. I'll say that much. I lived in New York City, Mississippi. I lived in there. My wife is from there. I lived in Quebec for a while, in Southern California, in Texas, and now I'm in Central Florida. Did I leave out any place, Linda, where I actually resided? No, I guess not. Okay, anyway. Um, but we have regular Sabbath services generated from this location or locations nearby, which are at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That includes tomorrow. So anybody's welcome to listen 3 p.m. Eastern Time from for the Sabbath services, or they're archived, they're recorded, and they're available at cck153.org. Christian Commandment Keepers. Okay, so that's a little bit about me and what I do when I'm not working at my regular job, which is teaching English to immigrants. I teach English as a second language, usually to immigrants, sometimes to foreign students who are coming here to study, but often to people who've actually come to America to live and need to learn the language, as my grandparents needed to do about a century ago. There was a Palestinian who was wandering around in the desert, and he had lost his way. He was in real trouble. Uh, but as he was wandering around, he saw a lamp half buried in the sand. He picked up the lamp. He rubbed the lamp. A genie came out. And of course, wow, he was quite impressed. And so, of course, he had three wishes. You know how the stories go. So he said, I want to be first, I want to get out of here. I want to be in a luxury hotel in Dubai. Okay, so there he is. Second wish, I'd like $1 million. $1 million appear. And now he decides, I'm a Palestinian. I need to be patriotic. So for his third wish, he says, I wish that the Israelis would be thrown into the sea. He winds up back in the desert with nothing. And so the moral of this story is, be careful what you wish. Your genie may be Jewish. Hope you like that story. I don't know what kind of response it got. All right. As we get into the autumn festival season, the songs of ascents are very relevant. Songs of degrees, as they were called, I think, in the Old King James Bible. And so that's my subject for today. The book of Psalms is an extremely important book. It's the hymnal of the church. And you see, what you sing, and the poetry that you recite, that's what you remember. And so in the New Testament, Psalms are quoted extensively because people didn't always have Bibles in front of them, but they knew the Psalms. The Psalms were what they sang, what they recited, and so the Psalms were a very handy source for, and of course the Psalms are filled with prophecies of Jesus Christ and his ministry. So they're quoted extensively in the New Testament. And as I said, they represent, in a sense, the hymnal of the church. Not that you only sing what's there, but they represent not only hymns, but then models for newer hymns. Right now, in fact, even as I speak, here in the happiest place on earth, where I live, here we have Walt Disney World, and tonight is a night of joy. Contemporary Christian music fills the air, and tomorrow night as well, sellout crowds. I guess mostly of younger people singing various Christian, religious, biblical themed songs. CCM we call it. I want to go to the book of James, the 5th chapter, and verse 13. What the New Testament tells us about Psalms. It says, "Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray." This is James 5:13. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing psalms. I remember back when a long time ago, 1969, I went to Israel to participate in excavations on the Temple Mount. And when I got there, one of the songs on the hit parade was from the Psalms, and I was so impressed. I was looking at watching this little girl. I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years old, and she was singing in Hebrew. A song on the hit parade, but it was taken out of the Psalms. That was one of my first impressions of being in Israel. I want to go to Ephesians, the fifth chapter. Ephesians, the fifth chapter, and I want to go to the 18th verse. Ephesians 5 and verse 18. It says, "And do not be drunk with wine." Now, it's not wrong to drink wine, but you don't drink to the point of intoxication. "And do not be drunk with wine, in which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit." Verse 19. "Speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord." And of course, to finish the thought, giving thanks always for all things to God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. So the Psalms ought to play a very important part in the culture of Christians. And the Psalms are divided into various sections, as you know, and there are 5 books of the Psalms. And in the fifth book is a section of 15 Psalms that are called Songs of Degrees. And people talk about uh, what they really are all about. Why are they, why is this section organized this way? The Songs of Degrees. Uh, Now, there's a passage in the Talmud about 15 steps between the court of the women and the court of the Israelites in the temple at the time of Jesus Christ. There's a claim made that there were 15 steps, and that those 15 steps were there because of these 15 psalms. Some people infer from that the psalms were recited going up those steps, but that's an inference. That's not a direct. You don't have to be forced to think that way, but it's a speculation. And I'm going to say more about the purpose of those psalms or why they're organized the way they are. In fact, I'm getting into that now. I want to go to the book of Isaiah. One of the great rulers of ancient times was Hezekiah. There's the tunnel of Hezekiah is there in Jerusalem today. Hezekiah was one of the great rulers of ancient Israel. He lived about 700 years before Christ, and a miracle occurred in his life. He was told he was about to die. He prayed, and God intervened and said, "Okay, I'm going to give you 15 more years." And then he said, as a sign, what do you want me to do as a sign? You know the story. It's in Second Kings and in Second Chronicles. And he had the choice of, his father had a sundial. His father had been king before him, and there was a sundial, and either it was going to be pushed up 10 degrees or back 10 degrees. He thought it was a greater miracle if it was pushed back 10 degrees. All of you know that as account. You can read about it. But in Isaiah 38, he's reacting to this. Isaiah 38:19. The living man, he shall praise you, as I do this day. The Father shall make known your truth to the children. The Eternal was ready to save me. Therefore, this is verse 20 of Isaiah 38. Therefore, we will sing my songs with stringed instruments all the days of our life in the house of the Eternal. So one commentator believed that these 15 Psalms are there because of the miracle that occurred in the life of Hezekiah. The 15 Psalms represent the 15 years added to his life. 10 of them have no author, because perhaps they are Psalms of Hezekiah. And so those 10 would be representing the 10 degrees of Ahaz's sundial that went back. Now there are 5 other ones that do have an author. There's 2 sections of that section of Psalms, 2 subsections, you might say. 7 Psalms in one, 7 in the other. In each section there are 2 Psalms of David. 2 Psalms attributed to David or in his honor. Everybody all right? And then in the middle, 1 Psalm, which is of Solomon. And so that's the middle one, breaking up the 2 halves. You have, as I said, 7 on each side, two of each of David, and then in the middle, Song of Solomon. And so there's 5 altogether that have authorship, and 10 without authorship that perhaps are attributed to Hezekiah. Now, all of that I've just said is speculative, but it's worthy of note. And Bullinger's Companion Bible had that idea. Now, I wanted to say something about the Psalms from the point of view of how most people view them. And they're viewed as Psalms that pilgrims would recite as they went up to Jerusalem. When you go to Jerusalem, you go up in the spiritual sense, but even in the geographical sense. You go up to Jerusalem. And so, as you know, there are three pilgrimage festivals: Passover, Pentecost, and the Festival of Tabernacles, when people would go up to Jerusalem. And so these pilgrim psalms are thought of as connected to that. And I believe that one purpose they serve is that they are kind of themed to the first couple of weeks of the seventh month on the sacred calendar, the holy day, the beginning of the holy day season. That, in other words, Psalm 120 ties in with the Festival of Trumpets. Psalm 129, the 10th one, ties in with the Day of Atonement. And then Psalm 133 ties in with the day before the Festival of Tabernacles. And then Psalm 134 with the 15th day of the seventh month, which is the Festival of Tabernacles. And I want to talk about that, among other things, as I have time. Obviously, I can't cover the entire the entire subject in an evening, but I want to put some food for thought out there for everybody. So I want to go to Psalm 120, and as I'm saying, one way to look at these psalms is that they represent a pilgrim's, heading for Jerusalem to keep the Festival of Tabernacles there. Excuse me. So let's go to Psalm 120. Psalm 120. Now, I would like to say this. The Psalms are called Shir HaMa'alot, a song of degrees. There's one of them, though, where the Hebrew is slightly different, and that is Psalm 121. For those of you who have some familiarity with Hebrew, that is the one psalm that says Shir La Ma'alot, and it's a song of degrees, but maybe the meaning is a song in the manner of degrees. That is to say, the pattern of the Psalm 121 is a step-like pattern. A word is said, repeated in the next verse, and then a key word is said and repeated in the next verse. So it has a step-like progressive form. Psalm 121, especially that psalm. And if I have time, I'll get to that psalm. But that is the one psalm whose title is slightly different, but not enough to change the translation. It still says a song of ascents. So it really doesn't translate any differently, but it looks differently in the Hebrew. Is everybody okay? No confusion as yet? Everybody's clear so far? Okay. In Psalm 120, let's assume that this is related to the Festival of Trumpets. And what's the Festival of Trumpets about? Well, we've had a tribulation period. We've had great persecution on the descendants of modern Israel and on the Church of God. And now we have the intervention of the Almighty, and we have the judgments coming, and we have the day of the Lord. And so that's the Festival of Trumpets. Is pointing to those events. The day of the Lord, as you know, is roughly a year. So it begins on the Festival of Trumpets and goes through the year. And at some point during that year, Jesus Christ returns, probably late spring of that year. And you don't know, and I don't know when it is, because the Bible says we don't know. But it's sometime in that year of the Lord. All right, so let's go to Psalm 120. A song of ascents. In my distress, I cried to the Eternal. By the way, if you look at these 15 Psalms, they're in groups of 3. And so the first one tends to be a prayer in distress, a prayer of someone in distress. The second one is encouragement to trust in God. Trust in God is the theme of the second of the 3. And then the third one is peace and blessing in and from Zion. Peace and blessing in and from Zion. And I'll say more about that in a moment. So, in my distress, I cried to the Eternal, and he heard me. Deliver my soul, O Eternal, from lying lips and from a deceitful tongue. What shall be given to you, or what shall be done to you, you false tongue? Sharp arrows of the warrior, with coals of the broom tree. The broom tree evidently was a source of fuel. The wood of the tree was a very good source of fuel in the ancient Middle East and burned very intensely. The commentators say it burned very intensely. So it seems that what he's saying is the wicked are going to be punished, which indeed is going to happen during that period. And then he says, woe is me that I dwelt in Meshech, that I dwell among the tents of Kedar. My soul has dwelt too long with one who hates peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. So that's the environment in which God intervenes, the environment in which Christ returns. His people want peace. His way of life is a way of life of peace, but all around is war and turmoil, and Jesus has to intervene and put an end to that. Now, I want to mention the fact that end time prophecy very much revolves around the land of Israel, what Zechariah calls the Holy Land. The end time prophecy focuses a great deal around the land of Israel and around the house of Judah. And so these verses are prophetic about the end time. Uh, let's think about the situation of the Jews in the late 19th century, before the modern world, before the First World War, which seems to have been a very important demarcation in history. The First World War it seemed to have made a very big difference in the way history was going. It seems to have pretty much destroyed the optimism of the early 20th century with all the new inventions and progress that was being made. And then we had, of course, all these horrible wars of the 20th century and killing of so many millions of people. So all the hopes and dreams were in a way dashed later on. So if you go to the situation of the Jews before the First World War, the bulk of them were dwelling between the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea under the Russian Empire. And so he says, "Woe is me that I dwelt in Meshech." The descendants of Meshech wound up in what is now Moscow. Moscow. So in effect, he's saying, "Woe is me that I dwell, in the Russian Empire." And then it's also a little bit of a play on words. Damasek, or Damascus, is a similar word to Meshech. Damasek, or Damascus, which was an important center of Jewish life, but it's obviously an Arab city. And many Jews were living at the late 19th century in the Arab world, and they were a minority there. They had inferior status there. And then it goes on to say that I dwell among the tents of Kedar. If you look at Genesis 25:13, 1 Chronicles 1:29, Kedar was a son of Ishmael, and the people of Kedar are the Arabic peoples living east of the Holy Land. And so the Jews who were not living among the Gentiles in Russia were living among many of them in the Arab world. So either way, it wasn't an ideal situation. And as the end time comes, we find the Jews are back in their own land. If you look at end time prophecies, the way they're fulfilled is the Jews need to be back in Israel and organized in some way so they can actually have an army and be defending themselves and all the rest of it. If you look at how the prophecies work out in the end time, you need to have a Jewish presence back in that land, which now you do. But I want to go to Deuteronomy 33, an end time prophecy of Moses. In Deuteronomy 33 and verse 7. And this he said of Judah. Deuteronomy 33 verse 7, he says, "Hear, Eternal, the voice of Judah, and bring him to his people. Let his hand be sufficient for him, and may you be a help against his enemies." Now I'm going to say something now of a controversial nature, because I believe that the peoples of Northwest Europe, and those who, of course, later came to North America and Australia and New Zealand, are descendants of the lost tribes of Israel. Now, where do the Jews live today? Which I believe is the end time. Now, I'm not saying how much time we have left, but I do believe we're near the time of God's intervention. I don't know how soon that is, but I believe we're near. Where do the Jews live today? Well, they've been regathered in their homeland, but those who are not are living basically in the English-speaking world, and also a large number in France. So they have either been reunited with the lost tribes of Israel, with a very prosperous English-speaking countries, or they're back in their own land, with their own kind in their own land. And I think that's a fulfillment of this prayer of Moses here. As I said, you don't have to agree with me on all of what I said, but I think it's worth noting. So we see here anyway in Psalm 120 a relevance to the Festival of Trumpets and to the climactic events that are going to occur before as Jesus Christ returns. And unfortunately, there'll be very violent events because that's the nature of people. Unfortunately, human beings are rebelling against God's way, and he will have to, by force, put down that rebellion. Now I want to go to the 10th Psalm in this section. And before I do, I want to go to Leviticus 23 and verse 32. Leviticus 23 and verse 32. talking about the Day of Atonement. That's coming up soon. Um, it's the 10th day of the 7th month. Leviticus 23:32. It shall be to you a Sabbath of solemn rest, and you shall afflict your souls. On the 9th day of the month at evening, from evening to evening, you shall celebrate your Sabbath. If you check Isaiah 58 and Psalm 35, verse 13, afflicting your souls means to fast. And of course, in the book of Acts, it talks about the fast. Uh, uh, anyway, in Leviticus 23:32, it shall be to you a Sabbath of solemn rest, and you shall afflict your souls on the 9th day of the month at evening. From evening to evening, you shall celebrate your Sabbath. And you'll find in Psalm 129, affliction is mentioned. But before I go there, I want to go to a prophecy which I believe refers to Satan, Isaiah 14. Now it begins by talking about the king of Babylon, but then it fades, it rises up to the power behind the throne, to the king of this world, the god of this world, Satan, who was once known as Halel ben Shachar, however you want to translate that, Lucifer, son of the dawn. Anyway, in my New King James, it says Lucifer, son of the morning. I want to go to verse 16 of Isaiah 14, because yes, it is talking about the Babylonian Empire and about what happens to it, but it kind of goes back and forth between Babylon and then Satan, the power behind Babylon. It's a prophecy for the end time empire and the force behind it. So in Isaiah 14:16 it says, "Those who see you will gaze at you and consider you, saying," this is Isaiah 14:16, "Is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms?" When Satan is put away, which the rituals of the Day of Atonement picture that. They picture the putting away of Satan. You go to Leviticus 16 and the rituals of the Day of Atonement. By the way, a friend of mine named Dr. Ralph Levy has a wonderful book on that subject. I don't own it. It's quite expensive, but he has a book out on it. But anyway, on the rituals of the Day of Atonement. But anyway, if you see those rituals, you see they point to Revelation 20 and the putting away of Satan. Those who see you will gaze at you and consider you, saying, "Is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms, who made the world as a wilderness and destroyed its cities, who did not open the house of his prisoners?" So this was the state of the world before Jesus Christ intervened and before Satan is put away, which is a great time of liberation. The Day of Atonement is when the Jubilee year began in the 50th year. It's a time of liberation. I want to go to Revelation 20 and verse 10 for just a moment. The devil, Revelation 20 verse 10, the devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone. Well, no, I want to go. No, I'm sorry. That's way far ahead. I've gotten ahead of myself. I want to go back earlier than that. I want to go back to Revelation 20, the beginning. I'm sorry, I went ahead of myself. Let's go to the beginning of the millennium. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. And as I said, the rituals of Leviticus 16 of the Day of Atonement point to these prophecies. He laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. All right, and so people are going to be aware of this event. They're going to be very well aware of this event. And of course, it's a tremendously critically important event, which is why we have the Day of Atonement. One of the reasons for it is to picture that. That's not the only purpose of the Day of Atonement, but it's a purpose of it. All right, now let's go to the 10th Psalm in these Psalms, Psalm 129. So if the first Psalm deals with the Day of Atonement, the 10th one if the first Psalm deals with the Festival of Trumpets, the 10th one deals with the Day of Atonement. And look what it says. It says, a song of ascents. Many a time they have afflicted me from my youth. See the same term there, they've afflicted me from my youth, let Israel now say. Many a time they have afflicted me from my youth, yet they have not prevailed against me. The plowers plowed on my back. They made their furrows long. The Eternal is righteous. He has cut in pieces the cords of the wicked. See, liberation. Let all those who hate Zion be put to shame and turn back. Let them be as the grass on the housetops, which withers before it grows up, which with which the reaper does not fill his hand, nor he who binds sheaves his arms. Useless, of no value. Neither let those who pass by them. See, remember Isaiah talked about people looking on this event. Um, neither let those who, or in Revelation 20 would imply that too, I think, because of the nature of the event there. Neither let those who pass by them say, the blessing of the Eternal be upon you. We bless you in the name of the Eternal. Well, they're not going to say that about the God of this world and his demons. They're not going to say that about them. And it's interesting how this psalm is worded. Rather than saying, people will curse you, they say people will not bless you. So it does have a positive ending, because those who serve God will indeed be blessed at that time. So it's a positive ending, even though it's talking about an event of punishment, but it's a positive, of course, a very positive punishment, because it liberates humankind. It eliminates the downward pull that we fight against in this day and time. So neither let those who pass by them say, the blessing of the Eternal be upon you. We bless you in the name of the Eternal. Now I want to go on to the 14th day of the 7th month. So you're now on the 14th Psalm in this segment. You've gotten to the feast site, we hope. We hope you get there before the holy day begins. We hope you arrive before the holy day begins. So that's ideally what you want to do, right? So now it's the 14th day of the 7th month, and you're on Psalm 133. And what's your reaction when you come to the festival site? By the way, we'll be keeping the festival this year in Washington, D.C. The more the merrier. It's a very educational place. The more the merrier. And if you want to contact our website, let us know if you want to join us there for any part of the festival. Song of Ascent of David. So what's your reaction when you get to the festival site, wherever you're going to do it? Some of you go to a place in Iowa, and I'll be speaking to you from Washington, D.C. to Iowa, wherever that is. I'm trying to remember the place last year. It had a famous name, but it was a very small town, but with a very famous name. I forget the name of the town in Iowa where they were last year, but I remember it had a name that everybody would recognize, but it was a very small town. And well, anyway, whoever you're going to be in Iowa this year, on the 7th day of the festival, Sunday of that week, I'm supposed to be speaking to you. So anyway, and when you get to the festival site, what's your reaction? Reunion. You see family, you see friends, you see people of like mind. You're in small groups during the year. The ones who went to Iowa last year, there were, I don't know how many were there, 100, 200, 300, but these were people who normally meet in small groups, 5, 10, whatever it is, and now they all gathered together in 100 or 200, 300. Wow. So it's so exciting. And that's the reaction here. So the day before the festival is a time for reunion, time for getting together, time to be encouraged, a time for unity in the community. You're all together in one place doing the same thing. A song of Ascent of David. Behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious oil upon the head running down on the beard of Aaron, the high priest. Jesus Christ is our high priest, and the oil is typical of the Holy Spirit. Running down on the edge of his garments. It's like the dew of Hermon, which is a snow-capped mountain in the north. And then it goes all the way to Zion in the center. So, that picture of unity, a picture of God's power coming down from the north to Zion. And there's a lot of cultural background there that, that I won't go into now. It is like the dew of Hermon descending upon the mountain of Zion. For there the Eternal commanded the blessing, life forevermore. So you come to the festival site and you're buoyed up, you're encouraged. You see others of like mind, you're unified, you're there for the same reason. As I said, a reunion of family and friends. And then what happens? Then you come to the first night of the festival. The first night of the festival. And so in Psalm 134, a song of ascents. Behold, bless the Eternal, all you servants of the Eternal, who by night stand in the house of the Eternal. Oh, and this is one reason why in our community we have a tradition of a welcome service that first night, even if not everybody can make it, or even if you just barely get there, huffing and puffing and, stumbling through the door, in your traveling clothes. But we have the welcome night service. And this psalm reminds us of that. A song of ascents. Behold, bless the eternal, all you servants of the eternal, who by night stand in the house of the eternal. Lift up your hands in the sanctuary and bless the eternal. The eternal has made heaven, who made heaven and earth, bless you from Zion. So you see that tends to fit the concept of going up to the feast and keeping the various annual holy days and culminating with the Festival of Tabernacles. So that's one idea in these Psalms. I wanted to talk about this concept of God blessing you from Zion. Uh, there's spiritual meaning to that. I want to go to Psalm 125. Psalm 125 in this same segment that we're dealing with here, the Songs of Ascents. In Psalm 125, the sixth Psalm of this group here, let's go to the fifth verse. Well, let's go to the fourth verse, okay? This is my habit. I often start with a verse and then say, let's go back so I can get the context of it. All right. Do good, O Eternal, to those who are good and to those who are upright in their hearts. As for such as turn aside to their crooked ways, the Eternal shall lead them away with the workers of iniquity. And then he ends, peace be upon Israel. Shalom al Yisrael. Peace be upon Israel. And of course, Israel was the church of that period. As it's called in the book of Acts, the church in the wilderness. It was the old covenant congregation, and the center of it was in Jerusalem, in the area called Zion. And we go to now Psalm 128, and I want to go to verse 5. The Eternal bless you out of Zion, and may you see the good of Jerusalem all the days of your life. Yes, may you see your children's children again. Shalom al Yisrael. Right? Since we have the merits here, Urevanim levanecha shalom al Yisrael. That's the Hebrew there. Yes, may you see your children's children. Peace be upon Israel. Now, I'm mentioning this because of background for the Apostle Paul. Let's see how Paul put it in Galatians 6, because Paul, of course, was steeped in these verses. He knew these verses. He knew these psalms that prayed for Shalom al Yisrael, peace upon Israel. So here's what he says in Galatians 6 and verse 16. He says at the end of the book of Galatians, and as many as walk according to this rule, peace and mercy be upon them and upon the Israel of God. So the Bible says peace upon Israel. In the New Testament, he says upon the Israel of God, because he's talking about the spiritual Israel, the church, the New Testament church, which is the spiritual Israel, the Israel of God. And you can see that in Galatians 3 and verse 29. So whatever your ethnic background, you're the Israel of God if you're a converted Christian. He says in verse 29 of Galatians 3:29. And if you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's seed. Galatians 3:29. And if you are Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. So you see peace upon Israel, peace upon the Israel of God. And Zion is symbolic of the church. Zion is a name given to the city of Jerusalem, where the temple was, where the Davidic monarchy was, where the Levitical priesthood was, where the pilgrimages took place during the festival seasons. And so it represents the community of God, of God's people. And in New Testament times, Zion represents the church. And you see that in the book of Hebrews. I want to go to Hebrews 12 and verse 22. So the Psalms of Songs of Ascents, the third psalm of each group, and actually the last two, they focus on blessing and peace and blessing in and from Zion. In other words, the blessing comes through the church. In other words, God has raised up a community of followers of Jesus Christ, disciples of Jesus Christ, who are preparing to be kings and priests and judges in the millennium. And the blessings that come to the world will come through Christ, but then through his church. So I want to go to Hebrews 12 and verse 22. And what does it say about Christians? It says, but you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. So the Jerusalem below is a type of God's throne, the heavenly Jerusalem, the new Jerusalem in Revelation 21. But you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven, to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better things than that of Abel, because Abel's death could not, justify us, but Jesus' death did. And along those same lines, I go back to Galatians again, to the 4th chapter. Again, how Jerusalem, which is pictured in these Psalms, going up to Jerusalem, is symbolic of the church and the heavenly Jerusalem, where the church ultimately dwells. Because in the long run, everybody's going to be in the church who's still alive, and those who live forever will live forever as, in effect, part of that new Jerusalem. So we want to go to Galatians 4:26, and here Paul says, "But the Jerusalem above is free. The Jerusalem above is free, which is the mother of us all." Now, I want to say one last thing, uh, and then I'll stop because I don't want to go long. I want to go more or less the length of a college lecture, and then there are people listening, so there might be Q&A or discussion. But I want to say that a great scholar of the Bible who died about 10 years ago um, said that if you look at these Psalms, they picture the millennium, the beginning of God's kingdom, and the first 15 years of the millennium. And this would explain why we have the situation in Ezekiel 38. In other words, we understand from Numbers 14:34 and Ezekiel 4:6 that we have in prophecy the principle of a day for a year. Many of you know that because you're students of the Bible. So you know that in the Bible there's the prophecy of a day for a year. Numbers 14:34, Ezekiel 4:6. So what this scholar said is that the 10th Psalm, I'm sorry, rather that the 15 Psalms are symbolic of the first 15 years of the kingdom of God, and that would mean that Psalm 5 would happen maybe in the 5th year of the millennium. And so what would that imply? That would imply that when Christ returns, he will first liberate the people who are in Israel suffering there. He comes back to the Mount of Olives, you all know, and he comes to Jerusalem, and then he regathers all of the descendants of the various tribes of Israel. He regathers them. So in the Middle East there is peace and prosperity, but it would seem that he has not yet extended his reign to all the world, and this explains Ezekiel 38, how in the millennium this could happen, because the millennium is there, but it hasn't extended its rule everywhere. So I want to go to Ezekiel 38 and just briefly refer to the fact that here you have an invasion coming on the land of Israel from Russia and China, from Northeast Asia. Uh, and as I said, why would that be in the millennium? Well, these people have been defeated in the beginning of the millennium supernaturally, but perhaps after a number of years go by, maybe they somehow think that they can somehow regather and one last try, defeat the Israelites, because it looks like the Israelites have disarmed. That's the impression that they're going to have, because the Israelites are no longer armed. Their country is totally at peace, totally safe, and so there's no armaments anymore. So these people, not entirely rationally, but t- people who do these things are not entirely rational. So they gather together for one last invasion of the Middle East. And so in Ezekiel 38 it says, "Now the word of the Eternal came to me, saying, Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal." You see Meshech again, and Tubal. There's a city in Russia, Moscow. There's another one called Tobolsk. "And prophesy against him." By the way, this prince of Rosh could also be translated, it's Nasi Rosh in Hebrew, could be translated as the chief prince. But it could also be translated Prince of Rosh. And of course, the name Russia comes to mind. "Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog." And by the way, if you consider Gog not only a person, but perhaps the name of a place or an ethnic group, you have 10 nations mentioned here. Just like the 10 nations that Jesus Christ conquers when he first comes, you have 10 nations here that invade the Middle East. "Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophesy against him." By the way, other nations are mentioned later. I'm not going to read all of them. And say, thus says the Lord Eternal, behold, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal. So he says, I'm going to beat you. So not any army of people. I'm going to take care of you. And notice the condition in Ezekiel 38:11. Now, any of you who've been to Israel or who know about Israel realize that's not the condition in Israel now. They're armed to the teeth and they're walled off. They got walls everywhere. They're building another wall now. Ezekiel 38:11. But notice with this condition, then you will say, I will go up against a land of unwalled villages. That's not Israel now. I will go against the land of unwalled villages. I will go to a peaceful people who dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Not that way now. But notice what God says in Ezekiel 39. And you, son of man, prophesy against Gog, and say, thus says the Lord Eternal, behold, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal, and I will turn you around and lead you on, bringing you up from the far north, and bring you against the mountains of Israel. Verse 3, then I will knock the bow out of your left hand, and cause the arrows to fall out of your right hand. You shall fall upon the mountains of Israel, you and all your troops, and the peoples who are with you. I will give you to the birds of prey of every sort, and to the beasts of the field, and to be devoured. You shall fall on the open field, for I have spoken, says the Lord Eternal. So this final victory, and then, of course, God's kingdom spreads eventually, of course, throughout the whole world, as you know. Isaiah 11:9, right? The earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Eternal as the waters cover the sea. But perhaps this invasion occurs 5 years into the millennium and is prophesied in Psalm 124, the fifth psalm of this section. So now I go to Psalm 124, a song of ascents of David. If it had not been the Eternal who was on our side, let Israel now say, if it had not been the Eternal who was on our side, when men rose up against us, they would have swallowed us alive. When their wrath was kindled against us, then the waters would have overwhelmed us. The stream would have gone over our soul. Then the swollen waters would have gone over our soul. Blessed be the Eternal who has not given us as a prey to their teeth. Our soul has escaped as a bird from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken, and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Eternal, who made heaven and earth. So perhaps this is a prophecy of that final invasion of Gog and Magog that are supernaturally defeated, perhaps into the millennium. So let me just conclude by going to Psalm 126. I'm going a little bit over time, but I wanted to also do this one, Psalm 126. This is the seventh of these Psalms, and in the Jewish community, this Psalm is recited after a major meal takes place. There's a prayer that is said after the meal, and this precedes it on the Sabbath. This Psalm is recited before the prayer after one has had a major meal. So Psalm 126 is associated in the Jewish tradition with the Sabbath. Now, some of you may remember, if you're old enough, 1979 and the Sadat-Begin agreement. President Carter, and I pray that he'll, be well. He's having health issues. But anyway, President Carter in 1979 was there with Sadat and Begin, and a peace agreement was signed. And if you ever go back over that meeting, when the peace agreement was signed, Menachem Begin read this psalm in Hebrew, and when he finished, he said, I don't have to translate. It's Psalm 126. So if you want to go back, and it was, I guess, summer of 79 when that took place, but when you can check back on that. I'm going to go now to Psalm 126 as my final thought here. When the Eternal brought back the captivity of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter, and our tongue with singing. Then they said among the nations, the Eternal has done great things for them. The Eternal has done great things for us, and we are glad. So bring back our captivity, O Eternal, as the streams in the south. When the rainy season begins, the dry wadis fill up with water and begin to flow. Those who sow in tears shall reap in joy. He who continually goes forth weeping, bearing seed for sowing, in other words, if you hang in there through thick and thin, shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. very encouraging. Life has its ups and downs, but ultimately things will work out. So I want to finish by going to Galatians 6 and verse 9, which ties in with that. Galatians 6 and verse 9. Here, Paul, building on that thought, I'll first read this verse, Psalm 126:6. He who continually goes forth weeping, bearing seed for sowing, shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. And then Galatians 6 and verse 9. And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. So I hope that's opened up some ideas, food for thought regarding this section of the Psalms, the Songs of Ascent. Hope it has been of some value to the listeners, the viewers. And then if you have any discussion now, this is now the discussion time. I can't hear anything, but is there a problem with the system? Were you able to hear me? I'm getting no feedback. You heard me okay? Okay.
Just a minute.
Okay. We're dealing with some people who are having some technical difficulties. Okay. For the talk, yeah, Peggy's taking my phone away here. Okay. For the Q&A, what we usually do is whoever has a question or a comment can turn on their camera. Otherwise, they can just say, type in the chat room saying, okay, I'd like to have something to say. So at this time, if there's anybody who has anything they'd like to say or a question. Don't be bashful. I know there's some good talkers out there.
It could be on some other subject if you want. If someone is listening in Australia, let me just say, years and years ago, I was invited to go down there and speak, and I wasn't able to do it. But I've got some friends down there, and if you know them, Jeff Robertson and John O'Donnell, who are very musical. And you can tell John O'Donnell that we're still using his song, The World Today. It's in our hymnal. I hope he doesn't mind, but we have The World Today that he wrote in our hymnal. So if you have any connection with those people, tell them hello, tell them good day from the Kaplans.
I think they may have dropped off. They were having some audio trouble.
All right.
I guess it was getting gargled under all the water. The long trip.
Well,
there's Alan Turner.
Okay.
I knew it was one of the people that would say something.
I actually can see you too.
Mark, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Barely, but I can hear you.
Okay. In the beginning, you talked about the songs that were sung as they went up to Jerusalem.
That is one idea, that these were recited by pilgrims as they were heading to Jerusalem. It's one idea. See, the problem is they're called songs of degrees or songs of elevations. Ma'alot, the Hebrew word signifies going up, degrees as you go up. And so the question is, what are these degrees? Well, one theory was there's the degrees on the sundial of Ahaz. One theory is that they are connected to the pilgrims who went up to Jerusalem, and another theory is that they have to do with the steps going up from the court of the women to the court of the Israelites, and priests and Levites would recite these psalms as they went up those steps. But all of those are speculation.
But you did show the content is the content of the ones you spoke of showed the relationship to going up to the feast.
I believe so. I believe that's there. But see, one thing about the Bible is that the Bible is designed often to have many applications, not just one. For example, the famous case, it says, "Don't muzzle the ox that treads out the grain," and Paul says that refers to support your ministry. So yes, you don't be cruel to animals, but but also Paul says, that God had more than animals in mind there. He was also had ministers in mind there. So so verses have more than one application. So these could refer to the 15 days beginning in the seventh month. That would be one application. It doesn't exclude other applications. Doesn't That's what I'm trying to say. It could have more than one application.
Yes. Well, I was wondering, there's no feeling that we have quite like the feeling of preparing to make that journey, that pilgrimage to the feast site.
Yeah, let me just add something to you before you go further. It's so much a part of the culture of those who keep God's commandments that in ancient times, when people spoke about the Festival of Tabernacles, they called it the feast, the Chag, the festival. And nowadays too, when people talk about the festivals, when they talk about the Festival of Tabernacles, they usually say the feast, because that's the one time that they get up and usually go somewhere, and it's such a special time. Anyway, go ahead now, continue.
Well, because there's nothing quite like that feeling of going up to the feast, to be reunited in unity with the brethren. What do you think is happening with the heavenly host at that time, and with the Father and with Jesus himself? Do you think that they also, in anticipation of watching the people get ready, have a renewed sense of excitement year by year, even as we do?
Well, when we speak about God, we speak of him in what we call anthropomorphic terms, human terms, and so we talk about his feelings and so on and so forth. That's a way of our relating to him and understanding. Uh, on the level of the angels, I would think they're perhaps more like us in that sense, and they probably have times when they're more excited than other times or whatever. I would presume, and I would tend to agree with you on that. That there's probably well. Now that I think of it, let's go to the Book of Luke, because that'll prove your point. Alan made a point, and Book of Luke proves it, and it's in the 14th. It's in the 15th chapter of. I'm sorry, the 16th chapter of Luke. I believe it is. Okay, let me. Is the fourth chapter to talk? Yeah. It talks about counting the cost here. Okay. In the 15th chapter, I believe it's in the 15th chapter of the book of Luke, where he talks about the joy, the joy in heaven when one person repents. It might be in the 14th chapter, because I remember when I count. Pardon me. 15:7. Okay. Let's go to 15:7. I say to you that likewise there will be more joy in heaven. This is Luke 15:7. Over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance. So you see that when a person whenever you were baptized, if you were, whenever you came to repentance and baptism, there was a great celebration in heaven. At least that's how the Bible puts it. But it's hard for me as a human being to talk about heaven other than in how the Bible describes it. In other words, the Bible describes heaven in terms that we can understand and we can relate to. So I don't know if we really can comment on what literally goes on there, actually goes on there. All we can comment on is what the Bible shows in vision and in these parables and in these discussions. So I would say that in a certain on a certain level, in a certain sense, you are correct. I'm I would imagine that the angels are excited when these occasions come around because they of course know better than we what's going to happen on the other end. Or I shouldn't say better than we, because I know that Peter talks about things angels desire to look into. So there's certain things they don't understand either. but certainly I would agree with you that there's very likely great joy and excitement, anticipation of these days as we have on earth. I would presume that would be the case. But we have to be careful, as I said, when we speak of spiritual matters, that we're speaking them as with a certain sense of humility, because we only exist on the physical plane. We don't really understand that other level, only to the extent that the Bible reveals it.
I have a question.
Dr. Merritt, the beloved physician.
I'll give you a call this weekend. We can catch up on things. So
Sounds good.
thanks for an interesting, inspiring discussion here. Who was the scholar that proposed the Ezekiel timeline? You said died 10 years ago. Was that Dr. Dorothy or?
No. Dr. Herman Hay, and the sermon he gave on that subject is available. There is a website of the sermons he gave shortly before his death. Boyd Leeson, who you may know, Boyd Leeson is a regular member of my congregation. He has a website of Dr. Hay's sermons for about the last few years of his life, and one of them is on this subject.
Oh, wonderful, great.
Yeah, so you can look it up, the Dr. Hay website that Boyd Leeson has, and you can find that sermon as well as a lot of other sermons that you'll find useful that Dr. Hay gave in the 1990s before he died.
Good. And who is what's the name of Dr. Levy's book on atonement? I didn't know that was available. I know it was his doctorate thesis, but I didn't know about
I
the book.
thought that well, as far as I know, you can buy it. You can contact him in Dallas. I'm trying to think of the name of the school where he teaches. There's a group called Church of God, a worldwide association, COGWA they call it, and they have a kind of ambassador college there, but I don't know what we call it. Anyway, kind of a Bible institute.
Okay,
But
great.
anyway, my wife Linda just said it might be available on Amazon, but I think the title of it would be like The Rituals of the Day of Atonement, something along those lines. She'll look it up, and if we get it before the question session ends, I'll announce the title.
We spent the last two Sukkots in Jerusalem, and there's just nothing like going up to Jerusalem, during that time. It's just fantastic.
I know, and I tried to call you to get your reaction, and I don't know what happened. Anyway, I'm glad that you haven't rejected me. That you're, because I wanted to get your input about what it was like over there.
Okay,
there are friends of mine going over there this year. You may remember a minister named Yeager, who was in Phoenix. His widow Sheila will be going over there this year for the feast. Sheila Yeager and some others from Arizona.
I'll call you when we get caught up. Thanks.
So my wife is searching for the title of Dr. Levy's book, but in any case, it should be pretty easy to find. Or you could contact him. I don't even. It's at he's with the Church of God, a worldwide association, which is based around Dallas.
There's a comment in the chat room.
Yes, sir.
Is there anywhere on the net a series of Ecclesiastes and the Feast of Tabernacles? Did you go through some kind of correspondence course?
Pardon me, just a moment. Is Dr. Merritt still out there, or anybody else who wants this book? It's called The Symbolism of the Azazel Goat. That's the title? The Symbolism of the Azazel Goat by Ralph Levy. Okay, The Symbolism of the Azazel Goat by Ralph Levy. All right, and now I was asked about Ecclesiastes and material online. Could you please repeat the question? Sorry.
Okay, it's in the chat room.
Sure.
And David is asking, is there anywhere on the net a series on Ecclesiastes and the Feast of Tabernacles? Did you go through some kind of correspondence course? Give a serving unto 7, also to 8, I believe it was called.
Let's go back to the book of Ecclesiastes for just a moment. I don't doubt that there's all kinds of material on it, so of course, I speak on it every year at the feast, but no, I don't know specifically what's out there, but I'm sure that there's plenty out there. There's a commentary on the book, which was written by a scholar who's not a religious man, but a great scholar. And I think it's called by the Hebrew title Kohelet, probably spelt with a Q, Qohele, Eleth, Kohelet. I think maybe a man who wrote it was named Gordis, Gordis. He wrote a very learned commentary on Ecclesiastes, which is called Kohelet. He might have spelt it with a K. Kohelet is the Hebrew name of Ecclesiastes, and it's sometimes spelled with a Q and sometimes with a K. And I believe the man's name is Gordis. He's not a religious man, so don't be offended. You can be offended, but realize that he's not writing from your perspective. But it's a very learned commentary on Ecclesiastes. But there's plenty of material on Ecclesiastes. But specifically, all I would do is just tell you to search and find. But I would like to do this. Of course, I'll give myself a plug. There may be a sermon or a Bible study available that I gave a year ago may still be available. I don't know. But I want to say this about the scripture you quoted. It very likely is the title of a Bible study, no doubt, or a book. But I want to go to Ecclesiastes 11, if you want to go there. There are 5 festival scrolls. They're called in Hebrew Megillot. Megillah is a festival scroll, and they're for different seasons of the year. And the festival scroll for the Festival of Tabernacles is the book of Ecclesiastes. But the book of Ecclesiastes is telling you that life is not just having a good time, but you should focus on the spiritual, and that's of course the meaning of the feast. God puts you in a situation where your needs are taken care of, but that's so that you'll be in a better frame of mind to learn. It's like a company does with their employees. They take you to a nice place, they give you a nice dinner, and then they tell you they give you the company line, as it were. So therefore, it's not good if the Feast of Tabernacles begins on a Sabbath to read the book on the first day of the feast. They want you to have a little bit of feasting first. And so if the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles is a Sabbath, then they read it in the synagogue normally on the 8th day, the 8th day of Sacred Assembly, which is a Sabbath. So they'll read it during the Feast of Tabernacles if there's a weekly Sabbath in there, and then if not, they'll wait to the 8th day and read it on the Sabbath then. And so the book is in effect a book for the Festival of Tabernacles as well as the 8th day of Sacred Assembly that's tacked on. And so that's what you see here in Ecclesiastes 11. It says, give a serving to 7 and also to 8, for you do not know what evil will be on the earth. So the implication is you got the 7 days of the Festival of Tabernacle, then you have that 8th day. So I couldn't help but talk about it because you brought that up. I'm sorry I couldn't be more specific. I'll try next time to have specific titles in mind. I know that book by Gordis about called Kohelet, but there's all kinds of material on Ecclesiastes, no doubt. I don't know if the Anchor series has yet done a commentary on Ecclesiastes. The Anchor Bible is very scholarly. Of course, they are agnostics, but in many cases, but they do know the Bible. So a very powerful commentary, if they've ever finished it, would be the Anchor commentary. But again, realize that this is by people who have a very different perspective on it, but they will give you a lot of information. But there's just a lot of good material on Ecclesiastes, and a lot of it by people who in fact do believe in it and want to do it. quite a bit, quite a lot. Because it's part of the general liturgy. It's read every year in public during the Feast of Tabernacles in the synagogue. So it's very familiar, very well known. And in fact, it's even influenced American culture. I'm a product of the 60s, I'm a baby boomer. And Pete Seeger, the radical folk singer, wrote a beautiful song, To Everything There Is a Season, based on the book of Ecclesiastes. Then a group called the Byrds, I believe, recorded it and became a big hit in the 60s. And then a very wonderful man named Mike Hale. And all of you know Mike Hale, or a lot of you. He played the part of Big Beak in the old festival films. But Mike Hale did a beautiful song based on the book of Ecclesiastes, Fear God and Do His Will. It's all that matters now or ever will. Mike Hale wrote a song, beautiful song. And there's another one that somebody wrote at the college where I used to teach. There's a time to, more or less like Pete Seeger's song, but with a different melody. So the reason I bring that up, Ecclesiastes has had a very big influence on not only on Bible believers, but even on culture in general. In fact, I was exposed to the book of Ecclesiastes when I was like 12 or 13, when I saw a Western movie about Chinese people living in the American West. It was called Walk Like a Dragon. Came out about 1958 or 59. And in that movie, there's a gunslinger in a saloon. And right before the gunfight, he quotes from Ecclesiastes, vanity of vanities, all is vanity, right before the gunfight. So that book has gotten around.
Any other comments out there?
Another commentary on Ecclesiastes that would be useful, it would be Sansino, if they have one. Sansino publishes commentaries on the Hebrew Bible. They have a very good one on Proverbs that a lot of you probably have used, and I would imagine they should have something on Ecclesiastes. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity, to teach the Bible. I really appreciate it, and appreciate that you took the time and trouble to take time out of whatever you might have been doing, to listen. So I hope all of you have a wonderful Sabbath and a wonderful festival season, and certainly pray that all of you will have a very spiritually enriching autumn festival season coming up. Well, one last thing I would like to ask you to do. There's a retired minister in Montana that a lot of you know named Jim Ryer, who's having health issues. I'm asking you to pray for Jim Ryer and his family, if you would remember to do that.
Oh, Jim, did you have something to say? Nope. Okay.
All right.
All right. Well, we thank you for speaking to us this evening, and
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
And we'll be in touch, and we'll have you connect our our two feast sites together on the seventh day. Have a great feast until then.
Okay, you too. Thank you. Good night.
Now you're on at 2 tomorrow, right? 2 Central, Eastern?
Well, it's 3 p.m. Eastern time, so 2 Central time, noon on the West Coast.
And that's your website is?
cck153.org.
Okay. Giving you a plug for your church. Oh, there's Alan again. You can't get rid of him.
One last comment from Alan, I guess.
Thank you for all you gave. My mind couldn't keep up, and neither could my pen.
I'm so sorry. I thought I was speaking a bit rapidly. I'm sorry.
You're accelerated.
Okay, I apologize. I was kind of doing it accelerated because I didn't want to, I didn't want to keep you people up late at night. And you know what happened to the Apostle Paul? Somebody fell out of a balcony and he had to resurrect him, and I can't do that. But okay, I appreciate your comment. I'll try to slow down next time.
Thank you very
I'll try
much.
to have less material and slow down.
Well, this is being recorded, and I'll put the link up when I get it.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right, that's it. That's it for this evening. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great Sabbath, everyone.
Thank
For
you.
those who are interested, at noon tomorrow we have our discussion. God's holy days, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Yeah, past, present, and future. So, if you want to tune in to that, or at 2:00, you can listen to Mark Kaplan. Have a great night.
I guess what do I do? Just exit out?
Yep.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks very, very much.
Anybody want to chat?
John?
Yeah.
This AnyMeeting seems to work better for me. Go to meetings.
You're having problems with your mic.
Yeah, your mic is horrible.
Center.